Good afternoon. My name is Marla Moore. I'm a community outreach coordinator with the Howard County Office of Human Rights and Equity. It is our distinct pleasure to present this afternoon's Lunch and Learn to further our collective understanding of equity, equality, and justice. If you're watching us on Facebook, like our page to receive updates about our events. If you are watching us on YouTube, subscribe to receive notifications about Howard County government offerings. If you're watching us on GTV, you better pull out that phone and open Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter and follow us at HOCO, OHRE. The Howard County Office of Human Rights and Equity is an entity of the Howard County government that seeks to eradicate discrimination, increase equal opportunity, and protect and promote human rights in the county. We are a catalyst in fostering attitudes and beliefs which confirm that all individuals have an equal opportunity to enjoy a wholesome, productive quality of life free from discrimination. Under the leadership of Administrator Yolanda F. Saunier, we provide county residents with excellent services and programming. We accomplish this through the Investigations Unit, the Equity and Restorative Practices Unit, and the Community Outreach Unit. For more information, visit our website at howardcountymd.gov/OHRE. And now, without further ado, I will introduce you to this afternoon's guest. Denise Boston, Dr. Denise Boston, using the pronouns she, her, and hers, is a Howard County's inaugural Equity and Restorative Practices Manager. Denise brings over 25 years of experience working on issues of race, mental health disparities, and social justice in collaboration with universities, community groups, nonprofit organizations, and public health agencies dedicated to building a more just and inclusive society. A Baltimore native and longtime Columbia resident, Denise enjoys traveling, music, Afrofuturism, author Octavia Butler, and Aqua Zumba. And now I will introduce you to Denise.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Marla. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Again, my name is Dr. Denise Boston, and I have the pleasure of being here with you today to talk about and to find a way to help us all understand what equity is, how it versus equality, and how it's connected to justice. So thank you. We'll move to the next slide. So most of my career as an equity practitioner and leader, I'm always being asked, what is the difference between equality and equity? And I always like to tell people that we actually need both to make a difference. And so as we move towards our conversation today, I'm hoping that you can see why both of these terms are equally important to the quality of all people's lives. Next slide. So here are some definitions and core concepts, and then we'll expound on them later. But when we look at equity, when we say equity and we think about the term of how does it impact our lives, in an equity, with an equity lens, what we're doing is that we're trying to understand and to give people what they need to enjoy a full and healthy lifestyle. So that's the one end. The other end is when we take a look at equality. Equality aims to ensure that everyone gets the same things in order to enjoy a full, healthy lifestyle. And like equity, equality aims to promote fairness and justice. But it can only work if everyone starts from the same place and needs the same things. And so when we take a look at equity from a lens of looking at both of these terms, We want to make sure that we defined equity as a state, an equality, and an ideal of being just, impartial, and fair. So I'll say that again. Equity, when we really think of how it impacts the ways in which we want people to live in this world and the ways in which we want to create environments in order for people to feel that they have a just way of living, that it's impartial, and that it's fair. And the concept of equity is synonymous with fairness and justice. So if you say equity, you're talking about fairness and justice. It's helpful to think of equity as not a state of affairs or something that we wish would happen. We really want to achieve it, and know that it needs to be thought of from a structural and systemic concept. So not just individual fairness, not just the ways in which we interpersonally think about each other, but the ways in which we have structures in our society that can promote inequities or equities. And so we're going to move to the next slide to help us understand that even more. So when I think of an equity concept, I also have to juxtapose that to inequality. What are the inequities that are part of people's lived experiences that we need to be mindful and aware of? I love this illustration. I know that when you talk about equity versus equality, you have, most of the times we've seen illustrations of a fence with three people standing there, different levels of how they're looking at a sports game being played. I love this illustration because it really helps for me see how we look at equities and inequities in a visual way that gives us a better understanding because it juxtaposes the inequity to the justice aspect. And I think the fence doesn't really give us the full meaning of that. So the first slide, you'll see that inequity and the inequality of the two people there is that the tree is leaning to the person that's able to have the apples seamlessly tossed in their hands. And so when you look at it from that perspective, that person has what they need. And the other person doesn't have the same equal access because the tree is not in their direction, unfortunately, and there's not many apples in that direction. So they may catch a few, but they're wondering if this is full of a tree of apples, where's the apples that should be on their side as well? And so some people have lack of resources that it keeps them from having the quality of life that they are deserve, and that's the equality that everybody is worthy of having in their lives. So the inequity is the opposite of equality. And the inequalities in the ways in which a lot of people in our world are living in. It means that someone has less than an equal share of something. The second slide is, okay, so there was some accommodations that were made. And there's a ladder that was given for both of them. It's okay, well, maybe you need to be closer. Maybe what we need to do is to make sure that everybody has a ladder. Well, even if that tree still is leaning more to one side, someone is still getting more resources. And if we don't have an understanding that there's something maybe wrong with the structure of the tree that's disabling the other person from gaining the same access to resources and that apple that they're looking for. So equality says, I'm giving both of you the same thing. But if we don't look at the structure of what's happening in people's lives, systemically, what is happening in the systems that we have placed in our academic systems, in our work environments. These are the systems that could be precluding people from having what they need based on who they are and how they're situated within the context of what they're looking for. Equity gets us a little step closer. And the equity part of it is that, okay, we're going to give you more resources because we have recognized that the same ladder is not going to give the same resources to both people. But as you could see, even with an equity mindset, even when we are mindful that we have to give more in order for there to be equality having an impact on everyone, there's still something missing. And so being an equity scholar practitioner, I'm always aware that even if we do provide something extra, there needs to be a more systemic understanding of what is needed. And that's where justice comes in. Because justice ensures that all people are treated fairly and with respect. Justice focuses on the systemic barriers that prevents people from reaching their goals and removing those barriers. So being very, very strategic and mindful and aware that there are barriers that's keeping us from understanding the needs of everyone. And so when that tree is seen as the structure that needs to be restructured, we can see that justice prevails because now the apples are equally on the other side as the other side. And even though each of us may come in with different situations, different perspectives, different ways of life, we all deserve to have a quality of life that will help us succeed. So I love this illustration, and I hope you can take this metaphor back with you as you begin to describe to people, what's the difference? What's the difference? Equality is important because everyone needs and deserves to have what they need to strive and thrive and live a wonderful life. Next slide, please. So again, I think with this conversation, I want to give many different terminologies and many different ways for us to take this in. Because even with that illustration, we still may walk away from what is really the difference? You know, what is one versus the other? So some of the key differences are, the first one is that equity is a process. That what happened with that tree is that the process was we have to think about what is lacking. And that's why when you have equity audits, when you have surveys, you want to get to the place of understanding what are people's needs? What do they feel is something that they are not getting? And the only ways for us to understand that is to ask. We need to be curious. So it's a process. Equality doesn't happen overnight. The difference between equity, where there's a process, equality is an outcome. So if we provide the resources, if we look at the data and say, oh, okay, where people living on that side of the county, there may be things that they don't have that the other side of the county has. So if we see those stories, we have an understanding of getting to the outcome of that everyone has a way of receiving the resources and having access. Another thing that happens with the equity aspect is that equity, the differences are recognized. And efforts are made to counteract the manner in which individual opportunities are not equal. So then you have an understanding. It's like, oh, We didn't see that. We were unconscious of that before. And now we have an understanding of what is needed and what do we need to do? What do we need to implement? What needs to go in place in order for us to close those gaps? Whereas quality recognizes sameness and aims to treating everyone equally. So we need to have the concept of equality because that is where we want to ultimately go into the ways in which people are seen and heard and valued. So that equality is the ultimate, that's the ultimate goal. But in order to get there, we need to recognize what is not in place in order for us to reach that goal where everyone feels that they have received it. And the last thing I want to talk about, the key differences, is that equity and inequity, the ways in which we have an equitable mindset, is that all people can have access to what they need, regardless of their backgrounds. All people have access. And the word access is the key word. It's that, so what can we do as a community, as a collective, as an organization to make sure we are creating access and inclusion for everyone? And then finally, in equality, all people get the same thing. So when we think of equality, we people understand, and that's why there's always, confusion around these two concepts, because we do believe that everybody deserves the same things. But in reality, that's not always true. Everybody doesn't have the same rights and resources and opportunities. And so we are looking to aspire to have a world that has an equality that's part of the dynamics in how we are working with each other, living with each other, and being educated with each other. But we know that with equity, it means that in order for us to get to the justice piece, we must work at helping all people feel included, feel a sense of belonging, feel that their voices are heard and valued. And that's a process. That's the work. Next slide, please. And this is giving it to you. She's going to go through those so you can actually see what I just explained. And so just rest your eyes on that. I'm going to go back. Thank you. Okay, now we can move forward. So let's even be more concrete. So what might equity look like in a school or workplace? So we talk about these concepts. We have understood the definitions of both of them. Equity is fairness. Equality is looking at things and making sure that everybody has it. But we also, with the equity piece, we recognize that everybody doesn't have the same. So if I'm thinking with an equity lens, a mentoring program inclusively for women of color may be an outcome of what we will implement in order for there to be an equal outcome of every employee, that that person has what it takes, what they need to be promoted, that this person have what they need in order for them to feel like they are seen and heard. And so they have tools now to help them be more resourceful and have a sense of empowerment. An after school program where there's tutoring that allocates more staff and supplies to underfunded schools. So we have a program that's in place that is financially supported, because we have more people that can be on staff and there's more money for supplies. Being mindful that there has been some inequities in the ways in which children have been learning, and just catching up because of some of the inequities. Another aspect we can take a look at is allowing parents to set their own schedules based around child care obligations. So a lot of parents are rushing home. I remember when I was raising my children, and there's a deadline in the aftercare program. You've got to get there by 6 o'clock, or every 5 minutes they're going to charge you for being late. If we have organizations that understand, and employment situations that understand that this particular person who's a stellar employee needs to leave early in order to pick up their child, having that accommodation is coming from an equity mindset. And then the last one is a leadership seminar designed for junior level employees. And so what is that? How does that help? Who put that kind of initiative together in order for employees to feel that there is an equal playing field when it comes to how they're understanding the concept of leadership, and that they can really utilize the resources in the ways in which they see the aspirations of their work. If they want to become a leader, there's something that's in place that helps them to move in that direction. So the next slide will give us something that will help. So with an equity lens, we are asking questions that will lead to those outcomes that I spoke about in the earlier slide. So the question that may be posed is, have we created an environment where women of color can flourish and feel like their ideas are being valued and heard? So that's a question that may be posed at a staff meeting, may be posed as we're talking about ways in which, the HR department is looking at, if they've done their research and they're realizing that we don't have a lot of women of color who have been filling out those surveys that says that they feel really valued and seen and heard. And so with that question, if we have somebody at the table that's asking that question, if we have a team with an equity mindset, you will come up with a program, for a mentoring program exclusively for women of color, because you have thought about what has been lacking. So those questions are critically important if we want to create an equitable environment, an equitable work environment. The question at the school setting, who is working to advocate for underfunded schools on a policy level, and how can we support their efforts? So who is there to work to advocate for young children who need extra resources? There's some policies we can put in place and some funding we can allocate in order to have an after-school program that's fully administered with wonderful teachers, and that we have the supplies that we need. Those decisions are equitable, mindful decisions. Somebody has to be there. The organization has to create an environment where questions like this will come up, and we have outcomes that can be there to support those questions. The other question is, how flexible are our parental leave and remote work policies? How flexible are they? Do we need to change the policies so that we have parents, and it's not just the women that are running, we have the fathers and the other caretakers, grandmothers, whoever's there, who's responsible, who has to work and also responsible for making sure that they have what they need in order to meet their child care obligations. This comes with an equitable mindset as well. Everything that we decide has to have a question: who needs more? Who's not getting what they need? And how do we determine how to move forward in allocating resources, allocating wonderful, innovative ideas in order to meet those needs? And finally, what ongoing financial, logistical, and emotional support are junior level employees offered when they are within their departments? And so, how do department managers, leaders, supervisors, looking at the needs of how do we help people rise to the level of their work aspirations? What do we provide? I worked at one organization that provided a master for people to pursue a master level degree. Something there to help them so that they could maybe take an online course, but it was funded each semester, maybe one course. And so, what are we thinking about structurally when it comes to making sure that people can have a lived experience, whether it's at work, whether it's at school? I hope those are tangible aspects of how we're looking at equity and equality. Next slide, please. And so I've said a lot, and I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to answer any questions that you may have. But I wanted to leave you, and I think in my bio, I talked about Octavia Butler. Wonderful science fiction, futuristic author who left us well too soon into her life. But she left a quote that I think is pretty applicable to our conversation today, in that there is no end to what a living world will demand of us or demand of you. And so when we think about equity and equality, it's really important to understand that this takes work, and this is lifelong work, and we will make mistakes along the way. But if the aspiration is that we want everyone to feel that they're valued, that they belong, if we want them to feel like there's fairness in how they're treated, that's going to take time, but it's going to be well worth it. Thank you. And I'll take some questions. Love to have some questions.
Thank you, first of all, Dr. Denise Boston. I'm so proud to work with you on a daily basis, fighting for justice and equity and equality. And you know what? I learned a lot. Even though I'm an outreach coordinator here and we do a lot of trainings, we take a lot of trainings, I feel like that tree thing was everything. So I wanted to first thank you for that. And I feel like that is something that you will see in our imagery again, because when you look at justice at the end and you're talking about dealing with the systemic things, it's often that we forget. So we forget that a workplace is still rooted in a 40-hour day. That was something created a long time ago because they were working people 70 and 80 hours a day. So they were like, this is 40. And then people got the 9 to 5, the 8 to 4 vibe going. And so, you know, what happens is that was also favored toward when males, you know, cisgender white males were the primary breadwinner in the dominant culture.
Mm.
so that the women stayed home. So the assumption was that June Cleaver was at home. So no man was rushing off. Oh my gosh, I got to pick up my kids. And anyone who's done the child care dance who paid $25 like I did, you're a single mom. You just were 5 minutes late. And yes, you paid about $20. Okay.
Mhm.
And you know that's not equitable because that's also compromising your children's food. That's
Mhm.
compromising their clothing. That's compromising the gas in your tank. And so often people, we're saying that people entrenched in the system are
Mhm.
still operating under the assumptions of norms of like 200, 300, 400
Mhm.
years ago, and they're not able to think different.
Mhm.
So thank you for that. It's when we talk about the system and the apples, sometimes there's no apples on the tree, sometimes it's rotten apples.
Mm.
And we have to cut down that tree
Mm.
when a tree is blighted, and we have to plant from seeds again
Mhm.
and nurture that soil. And to me, that's why we're dealing with these systemic inequities, is because the tree, forget the tree now, we gotta start a
That's right.
new, right, we gotta start a new crop.
Yes.
So what are some benefits of an equitable environment for
Mm.
people who don't feel like, it's like, I don't need any accommodations?
Mhm.
Why should I be rallying up for my coworkers and colleagues and community members who need this, need help? Why does it benefit me?
Mhm. Well, I think to think in terms of outside of yourself. It may not benefit you personally. You may have somebody that can pick up your child in the aftercare, so you're like, well, why should I care? And I would say, Marlon, my feedback to that is that um, you want a work environment where everybody feels that they have what they need. And if you have a colleague that's struggling, do you care about your colleague? Do you have a care about how your colleague's performance may be disrupted because of them being anxious? And what if this colleague is just the most amazing leader you've ever worked with before? Somebody that you look up to. But that person is struggling personally because they have things that they have to do outside of that work that they need to take care of. So I would say that if you feel like you don't have a buy-in to this, think about collectively how incredible your work environment would be if everybody was happy. You would get more work done. You would get awards because your team came up with innovative ideas. But if people don't feel that they are wanted or listened to or even valued, your team is not going to have the success that they're going to have. Your classroom is not going to be successful. Your schools are not going to be successful in the ways in which we're graduating every single child. So when you take a look at those statistics, you want those statistics to say how fabulous you're doing.
Well, I also think of an African proverb too, where they say the child who does not feel loved and embraced by the village will burn it down to feel some warmth. And I
Mm,
think we have a whole bunch of people now who are disenfranchised, and even people who may not be stereotypically disenfranchised. Look at all the things that are going on. Like when you look at crime, when you look at violence, when you look at unjust work, unjust, ill-equipped schools, all these things, they ultimately do affect the community,
mhm,
and that's something that I also wanted to know if you wanted to speak to intersection, because
mhm.
there are people, I can't think of anybody who's just won something.
Right.
Right? So somebody who says, "What about me?" I mean, here's the thing, if you live long enough and you're blessed, you will be old. That's a
Mhm,
protected class, and you want
mhm.
your rights and respect as an elderly member of the community.
Yes.
Okay? If you live long enough, unfortunately, you or your loved ones may face an illness or a disability of some kind
Mhm,
and need accommodations,
mhm.
right? So how can we educate people even about the intersections, the fact that you're not just one thing?
You're not just one thing. You are a mother who happens to be Muslim, who happens to be maybe have an invisible disability. You may also happen to be a young mother
Right.
with all of those things.
Right.
So we have so many positionalities that needs accommodation somewhere. And so there's no one thing, no one position that a person carries. We carry many, many, many different identities and situations that are connected to those identities. So, racism, if you have a certain complexion, and the ways in which you're treated, and with even a PhD.
Right.
So you may be Black with a PhD and still not treated with fairness, right? You may be someone who has a lot of experience traveling all over the world. A lot of people have that experience, they have a lot of privilege of having that passport, but you may not have had the opportunity to really understand that being a tourist is not simply part of your lifestyle. You have to get to know the people that you are in navigating and having a wonderful meal with if you're somewhere else. And so we need to have social intelligence as well, so that we understand that just because we have all these privileges, we also need to understand what it takes to know that people may not have had the same privileges that we've had. And that takes curiosity, and that takes a deep sense of really caring and wanting to know. I would say really wanting to be aware, and that's the work.
Yes, and I also think that a lot of times the accommodations that you may reject or call expensive without researching will ultimately save money, give work and classroom morale, because if every child is able to live in a home where they can get the right amount of sleep, they have food, and if they don't have food, you provide it for them, and you provide different types of learning, because some people need less stimulation, some people need more, some people are visual learners, and that carries on to adulthood. So if people have work, school, all kind of environments that contribute to that, that will save the company money. Like you said, that will guarantee more successful outcomes, because a distracted child will distract other students.
Mhm.
That will mess, I've taught, you've taught, that will mess with classroom management, right? That messes with the outcomes for everyone,
Mhm.
okay? A school, a workplace. But here's something that I could say that would really help people think about disabilities or abilities, okay? There's something that we all benefit from that somebody in a wheelchair or with a mobility disability may benefit from. There's that ramp at the airport, that's that ramp in the building. Now, I know most of us, when we have a suitcase or a heavy bag or a stroller, right? We're going to use that ramp because it's easier to enter and exit a building, but that ramp wasn't there
Mhm.
without somebody thinking that someone with a wheelchair or some other kind of mobility issue or whatever, it isn't that they or we, people who have disabilities, invisible or visible, it
Mhm.
isn't that we have the issue, it's that society has
Mhm.
issues,
Mhm.
right? And so just think about that. It's not that that's going to cost you a lot. It's not that that's going to be an eyesore,
Mhm.
right? It's
Yeah.
just that you have been used to seeing things a
Mhm.
certain way due to your cultural programming,
Yes. And conditioning.
conditioning. Exactly. So, again, why is it so hard for people to understand the differences? I know we could beat this horse all day long, but equity versus equality, is it just simple selfishness? Like, what is it?
Mm. It's being unaware. It's an unconscious um, understanding that we think we know it, until we have an opportunity to have someone really help us understand it in a way we haven't thought about it before. I think that's with everything. We think we know something. We've been educated. We went to school. But unless you really have had these experiences like you and I would just say for everybody, the conversation you and I are having is the conversation we need to be having with people all the time, Marla. I'm listening to you so intentively and attentionally because what you're saying to me is helping me understand something that I didn't know before.
Yeah,
That's the key. And a lot of times we're not talking to people who are different from ourselves.
right.
right? So I would say you have to lean in. Remember that whole thing about leaning in? You got to lean into this work in order to understand it so that you can say, I never thought about it that way before. I never thought structurally we could really make changes that could make people's lives better. I never thought about that because it didn't apply to me. But with awareness comes action. With awareness comes an understanding. And then you can move to make things different and better. And this is lifelong. So I'm not saying you'll get it in this 1 hour with us. No, it's going to take, a lifetime. But if you're committed to it, you will see some wonderful outcomes to what you're doing. And the people that you will impact, you may never know their names and they may never know you. But if you made a system change for a mother out there who's running back and forth to try to get her child, you made her happy, you made that child happy. That child could grow up to be running our government one day. That child could grow up to be someone that is another Nelson Mandela in the world. And so, if you're doing this work, know that you may not see the ramifications of your equity mindfulness. And then sometimes you're really, really blessed to see them.
And it also starts in the family. I mean, first, it's a personal journey. Like I would say, you use the term lean in, which, make sure that when you lean in, you don't lean in so far to the table that your elbows and stuff are blocking other people from being heard. Because
Yes.
one of the things that well-meaning organizations and people do all the time is they're like, we're going to build an equity model. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
do diversity and inclusion, but they don't talk to the constituency.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you're trying to, it starts with your family. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
because you've got family members from different experiences or different, education, different, they're different ages and all these things. So everybody at that dinner table, there's an old adage of you eat what you get or I'm going to starve you, and you don't question it. And we
Mm-hmm.
could keep doing that and say you get what you get, you take what you take. Or we could try a different way and say, what can I do? What
Mm-hmm.
do you think?
Mm-hmm.
How do you could survey your house. How do you think we're doing with equity,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
Right. You say you want more of an allowance. Well, why? You can talk to your kids and maybe you won't give them a bigger allowance, but at least find out where people are coming from. And also, another thing I would say too is when you're raising your kids or even talk, your family, your friends, there's plenty of media and good resources out there
Mm-hmm.
that we will be sharing with you so that
Yes.
people can, read this book, look at this article, watch this film. We have classes, Office of Human Rights and Equity on bystander intervention. We're about to have Awakening the Activists Within, and so many other things that will teach you, give you some tools so that you can converse. Because it's like, Denise said, you have to just keep the conversation going. And one thing too, just because someone doesn't speak English or your language, whatever that is, they might be from a country and know 7 different languages and they're fumbling with
Mm-hmm.
yours as they learn,
Mm-hmm.
right? As they are new into this society, or when you travel, you're new. But one thing you should also know is just because someone doesn't communicate like you
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean they have nothing to say.
Right. Exactly. That's why it's important to be present, to really not think about yourself all the time. I saw you. Yeah, to
That's a
be.
society issue, though. That's the thing. The inequities are what make you believe in scarcity programming.
Mhm. Yeah,
Okay, you believe there's not enough because in many ways, society is set up to make you think there's not enough.
exactly. And so to step away from the TV sometimes and step away from Twitter and to really have an authentic, meaningful conversation with your colleague. You may learn something. You've been working with them for 15 years. If you really ask the right questions, you'll find out that they love to go ice skating. You didn't know that, right? If you have a real meaningful conversation, you'll realize that they have children that are doing amazing things. but you never asked. And so, can we begin to really see each other in the way we've never seen each other before? That's living equitably. That's
Yes.
looking outside of yourself. And I would also say, I know we're coming up to a close, but I think it's all about self care too, Marla,
Yes.
because these
Yes.
microaggressions causes us to retreat, causes us to feel like it's useless, causes us not to love ourselves. But if you're taking care as an equity leader, if you're taking care of yourself, you're doing that self care, those microaggressions won't even touch you because you know how powerful and wonderful you are. So we know that people are trying to bring people down. And sometimes it's unconscious and sometimes it's very conscious. But if you're going to do this equity work, you really need to understand that it starts with you. It starts with your self care of loving yourself so that you can be here to love someone else.
And it starts very small. It can be baby steps. It might just be you reading something. And also, the other thing is, if you haven't heard this term in the year of our Lord 2022, there's a thing called emotional labor. Okay. So, if you are of a different something, right? That means, say, I'm going to ask questions from the LGBTQIA plus community. Before I ask them to explain something to me and make them go through trauma or pain, I need to go to Google University and YouTube University and see if because there probably is an article on that very thing, right? So I don't, and stop asking people to testify for their humanity because
Mm,
we all should know by now. Look,
mm,
the tree might need to be chopped down.
mm.
New seeds might need to be planted. The fruit might be blighted. We
And
may
how will you know that?
How will you know? But guess what? If you've got a whole bunch of apples and somebody over here has one, it's probably not by choice.
Mm,
So, what would you want? If you just think, we're not saying I want to live in a mansion, I want to have a yacht, I want to, drive a Hummer or whatever the latest car is. No. What we're saying is, if you look at basic human rights and a quality of life, what do you want?
mm. I love that question, Marla.
What do you want?
Marla, what do you want?
What do I want?
What do you?
Oh, to make me happy?
Mm,
I want to be having beach access. So on somebody's beach, work on my spiritual development, be around my family and kids, and, do this great work. Wherever I am, I'm going to be doing community service. I always have. My parents, got me into it from being little, justice, 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 fight for it, learn about it, learn why you don't have it, educate other people, make the world a better place before you leave. And also, like Dr. Maya Angelou said, the late great, let's not forget, she said, we are more alike than we are dissimilar. We have more in kind than we think we do. That is, like Denise said again, talk to people, learn about people, go to the store, smile. Okay, we still got those masks on, some of us, but you can smile with your eyes. That's what I'm saying. Reach out first. The best currency you have is a smile and a thank you and
and
a
I thank
please.
and I thank you, Marla. Thank you for this opportunity for us to model this work
Yes.
because it's not just about slides and a PowerPoint.
No.
It's about a conversation.
Yes.
It's about walking away with and gaining something that you didn't have before you met that person. So thank you, everyone. I hope that you have are walking away today with a way that you can begin to lead with an equity lens, that you can have a home with an equity lens, like Marla said. I love that. That you can be able to have an office, a department, a school, a classroom, a neighborhood with an equity lens.
And what is it that you want as we fade out at the end of our presentation? You got to find out what I want. What is it
Uh,
that you want, Dr. Denise Boston?
I want to continue to be around amazing people like you.
Okay, I can arrange that for you. And again, thank you so much. Can you tell us briefly about your the equity survey and the different things, like briefly as we go? Because I want to make sure that people understand that you did it, and
Mhm.
pretty soon they'll be able to read it and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I
All
would say simply just asking people, did you feel well? Do you feel welcomed living here? Do you feel that you're valued regardless of your background? Have you felt that your voice was heard in decision making? Simple questions that will help us have an understanding of what we need to do to be more aware that a lot of people do not feel the same way, do not have the same situations. And we have an amazing opportunity to implement wonderful, innovative ideas based on the data that will lead us to outcomes of quality and ensuring that everyone feels that this is the best place in the world to live.
Thank you so much. And it is the best place in the world to live because we keep working on making it better. And we are thankful for the support of the community, those who attend our events, those who attend our classes, and those who work with us side by side in the field, our commissioners and work groups, and many other people who are trying to make the world a better place. Can't stop, won't stop. All right. So thank you very much for being here this afternoon. You can see our social media and information, follow us, learn more, and keep working on self and spiritual development and be the best you that you can be, because together, our little teeny efforts are going to knock that bad tree down and make a better one. Thank you.
Thank you.